Well, good morning, Willowbrook. It is great to be with you. It's great to be with our Madison campus, our Bradford campus. So glad that you can join us this morning. And, I remember when I was in my 20s, I went to a leadership conference, and they had an unusual exercise to start with. They gave us this piece of paper, and they had it write on the top our name, and then they had a dash in the center. It said, right on the left side, when you were born. Now, on the right side, want you to put what year you'll be 90 years old. So put that year down. Again, I'm in my 20s, I'm young. And they go, now, I want you to write your obituary. Now, those of you who have seen obituaries, they've changed a little bit. In the past, you go in the newspaper, you paid per word. So sometimes it could get really short, depending on the family. Now it's online, so you can get some that go really long. But what would you write? Again, if you reach the end of your life, what do you want to say? Were you married? Did you have kids? Do you have grandkids? And it was the whole thing was the idea of if our life's going to make a difference, are we thinking with the end in mind? And for so many of us, we get into kind of the urgency of living day after day, and we get urgent to do this, and we kind of reach the end, and we look back and say, wow, what happened? I was kind of reminded at the conference I went a couple weeks ago, leadership conference, and there was someone there who was a friend of mine, said, you got to meet this guy. His name's Jimmy, really cool guy. He helped me a lot in business. I just want you to meet him, and told me a little about him. He had, in his 40s, really hit it big in business and became a multimillionaire. He got to speak on stages around the United States and pretty much had what he wanted. If he wanted to buy something, he bought it. As a matter of fact, he'll tell you, if I saw something I wanted, I saw some motorbikes, I bought it. I saw a boat I wanted, I bought it. I wanted a different boat, I bought that. I bought a farm. He said, pretty much, I realized I could have anything I wanted in life. I could go anywhere I wanted. I had freedom. When we traveled, it was first class. We stayed first class. He said it was wonderful, and I was just focusing on enjoying the stuff in life. And then at 63 years old, he suffered a massive heart attack. Almost died, had to have bypass surgery. And after he came out of that, he started realizing, wow, what is it if you have all this stuff and you just lose it? So it kind of was a time to resurface. One, kind of look back into his faith and connection to Christ. But part of it, he said, listen, I just want more time. I don't want to be dead at 63. And he started changing, living different so he could live longer and hopefully enjoy his stuff longer and enjoy life more and those in his life. And then at 81, just about 6 months ago, he had another massive heart attack, almost died. And I had talked to him just shortly after this, few weeks ago, and he said, I realized that time goes really quick. He said, from when I was 63 to when I was 81, it was like that. And I realized, even if you have more time, that time eventually runs out. Everyone, life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. I'm telling you, it just happens. And all of a sudden, it hit him. You know what I want to do? I want to leave a legacy. He goes, I don't want to live a life where I feel like my life was a finger in a bowl of water, and when you pull it out, nothing was left. And so he's now focusing of going, what can I do that will matter forever? What can I do that I'll be remembered for? What can I do? I want a legacy. See, I think that's a great thing to know, but can I say for most of us, do you want to wait to 2 heart attacks later at the end of your life to realize that? See, if we want to leave a legacy, we don't want to wait to the end of our race to do it. We want to do it at the beginning of our race. It's kind of like saving for retirement. You can do it any time, but I can tell you, the earlier you start, the better it's going to be. And I hope this morning that by the time we finish our time, we can have some challenges to say, what do I want to see at the end of my life? Not just what do I want to see, but how do I get there? How do I make the good choices? How do I make the right choices day after day after day? So when I arrive at the end of my life, I arrive with that feeling that I please God, that I'll stand before God and I'll hear that, well done, my good, my faithful servant. I have a verse in your Bible, Psalms chapter 90, verse 12. It says, teach us to realize how short our lives are, then our hearts will become wise. One translation says, teach us to number our days. Just the idea, the number of your days, you don't know how many days you have, so you really can't number it. I mean, they say chose 90. And the people in that room, I'm sure there's some who will make it past and some before. But the idea is if we realize life is limited, and we go in with that understanding, not somehow being deceived that you always have tomorrow, you always have tomorrow. See, if you want to leave a legacy, you will not drift into legacy. It must be intentional. So we're going to look at three things. I hope that will challenge us to look at life differently, to act at life differently so we can end our life with a legacy. We will live for legacy. First point, don't waste your life on what won't last. Don't waste your life on what won't last. You understand, we have a society that will tell you what's important in this life. They will preach it to you. And if we were going to look at what's important in this life, I mean, what would they say? They say, want it stuff. You know, the one with the most toys wins, right? We spend money we don't have, to keep up with people we don't even like, right? And we want to have the stuff. We want to provide. We want it now. We know that power is important, right? We want to be recognized. We want to walk in a room and someone knows who it is. We want to call someone and they answer the phone. We want to influence others. And, we want to have youth. We want to have vitality in our life that we can enjoy the life we have. Well, we're going to look at a story of what is called the rich young ruler. Now, it's unusual because this story is found in all three of the synoptic gospels. Synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all kind of follow a general pattern. John was written much later, and most of the book of John is spent on covering the last week in the life of Christ. But if you've ever seen a parallel Bible where it will go through like the birth of Christ, which is only mentioned in Matthew and in Luke. It's not mentioned in Mark. It's not mentioned in John. So you'd read that. Then you get to the next story. And it's kind of interesting because you can read the life of Christ and chronologically you can see where the different gospels come into. John mostly at the end of it. Well, here's an interesting thing. There are only 13 stories in the entire synoptic gospel that have all three of them mention it. 10 of them had to do directly with Christ, like his death, his resurrection. You'd expect that. Only 3 of them have the focus of someone that's not Christ. 2 of those have to do with Peter. And 1 of them has to do with the story here of the rich young ruler. So the fact that they were directed by God, all 3 of them, Matthew, that was written for a Jewish audience. Mark, again, comes from the testimony of Peter written to a Greek audience. And Luke, who said, I did the research. I put it together so you'd have a thorough understanding of Christ. All 3 of them mention the story. I think that makes it important. I think it's something we want to make sure we understand. All 3 of them give a little different view of it. I'm going to be reading from Mark, and I'll explain why I chose that one in just a minute. But look at Mark chapter 10, verses 17 through 22. As Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees before Jesus. Good teacher, he said, what must I do to receive eternal life? Why do you call me good? Jesus answered. No one is good except God. Do what the commandments say. Do not commit murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false witness. Do not cheat. Honor your mother and father. Teacher, he said, I have obeyed all these commands since I was a boy. Jesus looked at him and loved him. You are missing one thing, he said. Go and sell everything you have. Give your money to those who are poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. The man's face fell, and he went away sad because he was very rich. Now, the reason we call this story the rich young ruler, Mark says he was rich. Matthew says he was young. Luke tells us he was a ruler. So he had what we would say today. He would have what they said in that time. He had freedom. He had money. He had what he wanted. He seemed to have everything, but he did realize he was missing something. I love Mark's approach. Mark shows that when he comes, he falls to his knees to talk to Christ. He calls him good, and Christ kind of throws out, good? Only God is good. In other words, do you realize who I am? Then he names some commands, and I don't think he's being arrogant. He's done his best to obey these commands, and he says it. But Jesus realizes there is one thing holding him back from being a committed follower. There's one thing that right now holds a higher stead in his life than God does. The one thing is his stuff. And so Jesus makes a pretty big ask. He goes, sell what you have. Give it to the poor, then follow me. And the man, realizing, following God, keeping my stuff, makes a tragic decision to keep his stuff. See, I think we focus so much on what Jesus asked him to give up that we miss what Jesus offered to him. See, I love in this translation, the reason I chose Mark is because it says Jesus looked at him and loved him. I think Jesus actually saw a heart of someone who was truly seeking him. He saw a heart of someone who really was truly wanting to follow God. A heart of someone who really was desiring to do the right thing. And that's why he felt the compassion for him. But when he gave the challenge, he walked away. See, Jesus not only challenged him to do something that was a negative, give stuff away, but he gave him a positive. He says, follow me. If you look at that statement, follow me, you'll find it very few times in Scripture. As a matter of fact, we find it when Jesus is before Levi or Matthew. He's the tax collector. He's bought the tax franchise that gives him the right to tax the Jewish nation for the Romans and mark it up to make his profit. And Jesus tells him to follow him. So Matthew leaves the tax franchise, he leaves all he has, and he follows Jesus. We see it with Peter and Andrew when they were fishing, and Jesus said, leave your nets, follow me. We could look and he says it to James, he says it to John, he says it to Philip, and guess who he says it to now? To the rich young ruler. See, I think he was offering him something. He wasn't saying sell your stuff and become destitute. He wasn't saying get rid of your stuff. He was saying follow me, become one of my followers, become one of my disciples. But he didn't. Some have taken this to say, well, if you're a Christian, you can't possess stuff. No, it doesn't say that. But for this man, for this rich young ruler, it was the stuff that was keeping him from God. And just as he asked all the other disciples to walk away from their life as fishermen, their life as tax collectors, to walk away from their family businesses and follow Jesus, he was asking him to do the same thing. This rich young ruler had a resume for success, but he did not have a heart of surrender. And we have to look at times and saying, is there something that will keep us from following God? Are we wanting to give God most of our life? See, I think if he just said, sell half your stuff and follow me, he would have been good with it. Sell 90% if you follow me. He might have been good with it. But when Jesus said, give it all to me. There's a little book written years ago called My Heart, Christ Home. And the book is just a story of someone inviting Christ into their home as a metaphor for inviting Christ into their life. And they invite him into the living room, and they're fine. But then he wants to go into the kitchen where their desires are. And he's like, no, don't go there. And then they want to go into their bedrooms. And he's wanting to basically occupy the whole house. So the guy has one room he doesn't want to let him in because he's like, no, you can't go in there. I keep all my junk in here. This is stuff, I don't want you to have this part of my life. And he basically is, if I'm going to have all of you, I have to have all of you. I can't have part of you. And the idea is anything holding us back? Are we going to live a life where we're going to look back and regret of trying to hang on what we could not keep anyway? There was a man called William Borden. He was a multimillionaire as a young man. He was part of the Borden dairy fortune that had the big dairy farms over in England. And so when he went to Yale, he went and he knew when he graduated, basically he was taken care of. He didn't ever have to have a job. He could have anything he wanted. He could go any place he wanted. But when he was at Yale, he became absolutely committed to Christ. And he had a passion of seeing the message of Christ taken around the world. And he really felt for people groups that were unreached. And he started feeling this calling towards reaching Muslims that lived in China, a very specific group that he wanted to go for. And so when he was doing this, after he graduated, he took all his wealth and he gave it away to charities. He gave it away to mission organizations. And people looked and said, what are you doing? You're giving up everything. He said, it's okay. I want to follow Christ. He traveled to Egypt where he was to study Arabic as part of his preparation to be a missionary to the Muslims in China. And yet a few weeks after arriving, he got meningitis. And in a short time, he died before he ever got to reach the mission field. As the word went out about William Borden dying, there were people who were aghast. There were some who questioned God. How could God allow this to happen? This man had given away everything. He was serving God. He was going to be in missions. How could he die? There was others who used it to ridicule God, to see, well, look at this. If God's real, how could that happen? Well, there was someone who went to take his body from Egypt back to England. And when he got there, he got his Bible, and he started reading through his Bible, and there was notes where he wrote different points. And at one point in his life, when he decided to give away his whole fortune, he wrote in his Bible, no reserve. In other words, I'm following God. I've got nothing to fall back on. I have no reserve. Then there's another part in his Bible where he was writing about where his friends were trying to convince him he should stay in England. He could do more there, use his wealth, that he shouldn't leave, and he wrote the word, no retreat. And there was a section after he got to Egypt, after he was by himself, after he got sick, after it seemed like what in the world was happening, he wrote the words, no regrets. And despite his short life, Borden's commitment to Christ became a famous motto that missionaries have said for years and years, no reserve, no retreat, no regret. It's inspired generations, literally thousands of people who went into the mission field who said, I will be like Borden. I will not hold anything back. And there were people who reached so many unreached people groups because of the life and commitment. His no reserve, no retreat, no regret. Isn't it amazing that Borden was like the rich young ruler, but he made the right choice. He gave it all up. And in the light of eternity, we might look and say, such a short life, but in the life of eternity, his life impacted tens of thousands, if not millions of people, because people saw what he did and it challenged them to step it up in their following of Christ. Don't waste your life chasing what you can't keep. In the light of eternity, what's going to really matter when you reach the end? Our second point, legacy is built one day at a time. There are no shortcuts. Legacy is built one day at a time. There are no shortcuts. I don't know about you, but I love shortcuts. I love hacks. I don't want to read a big manual. I want to go to YouTube and it tell me how to do it. You know, and it's helped me sometimes. I remember my springs broke in my garage door, and I always heard, be careful, that can be dangerous. I went to YouTube, watched the do-it-yourself video. I can do that, and I changed it. I don't want to read a big book. I want to get a summary. You know, I don't want to have to go through. I want to find out what's the quickest way. We like shortcuts. How can I get there quicker? And there's some things in life that shortcuts are great, but there's some things in life that you cannot shortcut. And leaving a legacy is one of the things that there are no shortcuts for. We're going to look at a passage here in 2 Timothy, but just to let you know, 2 Timothy is such a unique book. Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, 2 Timothy's that last book. He's in house arrest in Rome. After this book, he would shortly be taken to the gates of Rome. He'd be beheaded. He'd be executed for his faith. And so he's writing this kind of like a last will and testament. He understands his life's at the end. He says a lot of emotional things. He says he wants, John Mark, who he had given up to come to him. He's wanting some of his friends to be with him. He's wanting the writings to come. In other words, he's getting a perspective of realizing that that number was about to end. And Paul says this in 2 Timothy 4, 6 and 8. He said, I am already poured out like a drink offering. The time has come for me to leave. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is a crown waiting for me to be given to those who are right with God. The Lord who judges fairly will give it to me on that day he returns. He will not only give it to me, he will also give it to all those who long for his returning. So I love this. Paul, what he's saying here, you realize, remember back in Philippians 2:17, Paul says, I am being poured out. It's in that present tense. Here, Paul says, I have already been poured out. In other words, he realizes at the very end. See, Paul was on the fast track to make it to the top. Paul was trained as a Pharisee. He was trained by Gamaliel, who was the highest ranked Pharisee. He was the one in which, after Pentecost, when the church is birthed and they want to kill the apostles like they did Christ, that Gamaliel stands up and says, no, guys, listen, if this is God, you can't fight it. If it's not God, it's going to wash away. So let's not do anything. And it's that word that the rest of the Pharisees, respecting Gamaliel, said, okay. And that allowed the apostles to stay in Jerusalem and build the church without persecution on them personally for many, many years and establish the church in Jerusalem before the church spreads to around the world. Gamaliel was that person, and Paul was a person who was respected. He said, I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was the one in which, when Christianity broke out, it was seen as a sect of Judaism. And the Jews were concerned because they had a peace with Rome that allowed them to keep their temple, to do sacrifices, which many other nations that were conquered couldn't happen. And the Pharisees were thinking, man, Christianity is going to disrupt this Roman alliance we have, or protection. We have to stop it. So Paul takes it upon himself, and he starts persecuting Christians. He starts imprisoning them. He starts executing them, trying to stomp out Christianity. And he's on track to be that next Gamaliel, to be that next guy until he has an encounter of the God kind. On the way to Damascus, he is struck down and Christ speaks to him. He realizes and he turns his life to Christ. And he makes a 180. He goes from the attacker of the faith to the defender of the faith. He goes to trying to stop the gospel, to take the gospel around the known world. He's called the apostle of the Gentiles because he took the gospel to so many different nations. He also was one who fought for the Gentiles. When the Jews were saying, first become a Jew, keep all the commands of the Jew, then you become a Christian. Paul says, no, we're saved by faith. A Gentile doesn't have to become a Jew to be a Christian. They can go straight to God. And he fought for that. He stood for that. God used him in a great way. That's why Paul could say, I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I have kept the faith. Paul had no doubt that his life, though being poured out like a drink offering, was pleasing to God. The drink offering was one of the offerings you could have that you could give to the priest to sacrifice for you. It was a cup that would have wine in it, and it would be poured on the altar that was red hot, that had sacrifice. And as that cup was poured, the liquids would hit the coals, and it would evaporate into a big, sweet-smelling, kind of foggy kind of thing, and then it would dissipate, and it would be gone. And isn't that a great picture for life? I mean, here we are. We only have a limited amount. It's being poured out, and it doesn't matter how long it reaches. Eventually, it's going to be all poured out. And though Paul said in Philippians, I am, now he says, I have been. He realized those last drops were about to go, but he understood it was all right because he had lived a life of legacy. So we have to understand if we're going to live that kind of life, we have to do it. And again, there are no shortcuts. We do it day by day by day. Do you understand that legacy isn't always about being famous? It's about being faithful. And some of us are creating a legacy and we don't even realize it because your small act of what you think is small in faith can have a huge impact. I remember in high school, my church was not a big church. We had about a dozen in our youth group. And we had a couple that taught our Sunday school class there. Still live in the Huntsville area, Tom and Belinda Talley. And I remember them caring for us. They would have us come to their house on Friday night and we'd have a Bible study. They invited us to hang out with them. And I remember as a youth, they were a younger couple and they were cool and they loved Jesus. And I tell you, they played a pivotal part of my life in staying in my walk with Christ. And I can tell you, they're part of the legacy of my faith. And they may not even realize it, but they had an impact. And I'm saying when you let God use you where He's put you, you're faithful with what He's given, doing what He's called you to do, God can use you to leave a legacy. Never underestimate the value of God using you. He can do far more with your life than you can imagine. He has gifted you. He has talented you. That's why I would say if you see Willowbrook as your church, if this is your home, it's not just a place to come and receive. You got to say, God, where can you use me? Because He's gifted you. You can be on our welcome team. You may be a gifted teacher. You may be someone who can come in and serve with our kids, our preschool, our teens. There's places you can be used by God, and God can use you to make a legacy. But it's not about a moment. It's about daily consistency doing the right things. I think of someone who I believe is leaving a legacy, and it's John Maxwell. I learned about John Maxwell when I was just a youth pastor at a church, and he was a pastor of this little church in California. And he would do monthly staff meetings. He loved leadership. He loved doing different trainings. And so he would do his staff meeting. Once a month, he'd do what he called a leadership lesson that he would give to his staff to challenge them to grow in their leadership because he believes leadership is influence. And so he would copy those, and you could buy them as a church and listen to them. And I always enjoyed listening to them and getting different insights. And then obviously, John Maxwell continued. He left that of the pastorate. He felt called that God was telling him to really invest in leadership, especially Christian leadership. Now, John will say he works with secular organizations, but he'll tell them straight up, every principle of leadership I got, I stole from the Bible, just so you know. He goes, it's there. And he got challenged one time by organizations. That's not true. He said, give me a principle that I taught. He gave it. He'd tell them where it was in Scripture. They were blown away. Well, when John Maxwell realized what God was calling, he said, I felt like God wanted me to be an author, that I could write books and books would live past me and I could take what I've researched, what I'd learned, and I could distill it in a way that no matter where you were in the world, you could read that book and use it. And so he started writing. He has written over 70 books that have sold over 35 million copies. and still being written, still being sold all around the world. And I was at a pastor's conference where he was speaking, and someone asked, how did you do that, John? How did you become a writer? How did you become so prolific? And he said, I just realized early on, I was a pastor, only had so much time, but if I was going to write, I knew there's like 5 things I needed to do every day to become a good writer. He said, every day I read. He said, if you're going to be a writer, you better be a reader. So he said, every day I would spend time reading. And then once I read, I would file. I would say, what did I learn? And I would, I might be reading a magazine. I'd cut out the article, or I might, make a copy of this. He said, I'd file it. Then I would think. I would slow down and say, okay, what did I just learn? How do I apply that? He said, I'd ask questions. How can this be taught differently? How can this be applied to a church? What can it do? He said, then I did the toughest thing. Every day I wrote. He goes, now, if you read some of those early things I wrote, I would be ashamed for you to read it. It was so bad. He said, but you understand, you can't be a good writer until you're first a bad writer. He said, and you can't be a great writer until you're a good writer. So every day, he said, that was my 5. I read, I filed, I thought, I asked questions, I wrote. I remember one of the guys at that conference said, well, John, you're a pastor, what did you do on Sundays? He goes, well, let me say this again. I read, I filed, I think, I ask questions, and I write. Someone said, well, how about holidays? He said, okay, this is tough, guys. I'm going to say it again. I read, I file, I think, I ask, I write. He said, I did it every single day. He goes, and over the time, these books came from all these files. They came from all this stuff that I learned. I got to actually attend a conference that John Maxwell did in 1988 in Skyline when he was just a pastor. And I still have that photocopied outline. And I can look at several of the lessons he taught and those that become some of his best-selling books. At that point, they were just one page of ideas that grew, that developed. And he would say this, listen, if you're called to do, you got to be faithful day after day after day to do what God called you to do. He said, I did this. Every day I did these 5 things. Now, he said, let me give you an example. He said, imagine you have a big tree in your yard. You want to cut it down, but you don't have much time. So you get up one morning, you have an axe, and you go hit that tree 5 times as hard as you can. You put the axe up, and you go to work. Next day, you get up, and before you go to work, you grab that axe, and you hit that tree 5 times as hard as you can, and you put the axe up. Next day, you get up, and you swing the axe 5 times as hard as you can. Guess what's going to happen to that tree eventually? It's going to fall down. And maybe that one day you hit it and you hear it crack and it falls. It could be while you're at work. It got so weak, a wind came and knocked it over. He said, but if you do that every day, he said, it's going to fall. He said, the problem with a lot of you haven't figured out what God's called you to do. You haven't figured out the steps you need to take every day. And some of you, he said, you're changing your mind every week and doing something else. He said, your yard has 25 trees that all have scars on it because you hit all of them a few times, but none of them many times. What has God called you to do? There are no shortcuts. How can you take those steps day by day by day? How can you be faithful in what God's called you? You want a growing relationship with God? Do you spend time with Him every day in His Word? Do you spend time praying? Do you spend time connecting with Him? Monica was a devoted Christian woman who lived in the 4th century. She wasn't a preacher. She wasn't a missionary. She wasn't a scholar. She was just a mom. She was a mom who loved her kids, especially one of her sons named Augustine. He was brilliant but rebellious. He was kind of sexually immoral. He was involved in a lot of bad stuff. He was just spiritually lost. And yet she prayed for him day after day after day. Matter of fact, when he moved to another town, she moved to that town. And she made sure she influenced him. She talked to him. She'd pray for him day after day after day. And there are people who said, he will never come to know Christ. He is so far from God. But she kept praying for him day after day after day after day. And then it happened. He met a believer. He became engaged in a conversation, and he started understanding what he had heard, and he received Christ as his Savior. And being the brilliant man that he was, he became full-fledged after following God. He became very prolific in his writings. As a matter of fact, we know him today as St. Augustus of Hippo. He was influential of theologians of his time. As a matter of fact, Martin Luther, John Calvin, all look back and say his writings were so important. And yet behind that legacy was a mom who didn't give up, who prayed day after day after day after day. If we're going to leave a legacy, there are no shortcuts. Are you doing today what you know God has called you to do? Are you being faithful at where God has placed you? If so, then we can leave a legacy. Our last point, Keep living by faith because God sees the legacy you're building. Keep living by faith because God sees the legacy you're building. See, it is easy to do the right thing when everyone's watching. I should say easier. It's easier to do what we know we should do when we should do it. We have others' eyes upon us. But if we're going to be faithful, it means that we're doing what God has called us to do when He's the only one watching. That we're willing to do what is right when no one else is there. It's been defined. Character is what you do when no one else is looking. Do we have character? Are we doing that? I have a verse here from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Actually, my favorite verse of the Bible. It says this: without faith, it is impossible to please God. Those that come to God must believe that He exists, and they must believe He rewards those who look to Him. One translation says He rewards those who diligently seek Him. This passage clearly says without faith, it's impossible for us to ever please God. See, faith is our ability to know that God is there and He cares even when the circumstances for the moment may make us doubt. Faith is the ability to say, God, I know you're there. God, I know you care. Even though what's happening right now, I can't understand. From my perspective, it makes no sense. If I was God, I wouldn't have done it that way. It's the ability to say, God, you are beyond me. God, I trust you. God, I know there's a bigger picture I don't see, you do. So I'm stepping back. And even though evidence says you aren't there or you don't care, I know you are there and you do care. So I will let this drive me to you, not away from me. Are you surprised when you read Scripture? How we just have to look at Job or Abraham or Moses or Gideon or David, and we'll see people who at times had questions for God. People who didn't understand why things that were happening the way they were happening. And then each of those people, rather than letting it be something that drove them away from God, they let it be something that drove them to God. Listen, there are times in our life when hurt comes. And at those points, we can be driven to God's presence, or we can be driven away from it, depending where we put the wedge. See, God can handle our pain. God can handle our questions. I love the psalmist who is so honest with his pain. God, why? Where are you? I waited and I waited and I waited. And then, God, you lifted me out of the miry pit. You put my feet on solid ground. So there's times like that where we look and faith says, God, I know you're there, even though I don't understand. And I'm going to continue to do the right next thing, knowing, God, that you reward those who faithfully serve you, those who love you. And those are the crucibles. See, it's easy to serve God when everything's going with you, but what are you able to serve God when it's not going your way? Are you able to trust God is there and He cares when you can't make sense? I learned long ago I can have all God's grace and all God's peace without having all God's answers. And when I try to understand, I go crazy. But when I just lean on my Father and my pain, I can feel His love. There's sometimes the race we're on is a marathon. We want to judge where we are, and it's only when our life is at the very end. It's actually only from eternity will this life totally make sense. About a decade ago, I decided I wanted to get in shape. I'd kind of got out of shape. I mean, round is a shape, but it wasn't the shape I wanted. So I wanted to do something. And I was a runner in high school, and I thought, I want to do something I'd never done. I said, I want to run a marathon. I ran the mile in high school. I did some longer runs, but not a lot. I didn't want to do a 5K or 10K. I thought I could gut those out. And I thought, if you're going to go to a half a marathon, it's going to hurt. You might as well do the whole marathon. So I decided I'm going to do it. And I got some training plans and started reading through it and started looking at it and studying how to do it and realized that there weren't no shortcuts. You couldn't decide on Monday you're going to run a marathon and do it on Saturday. You couldn't even decide that you're going to run a marathon now, 6 months later run it, and you haven't ran any. That's not going to work. But I had confidence in the plans. I did these things. I could do it. And so I started doing it. I actually found some joy in running. I found some joy in kind of the peace, being to yourself, some of the different goals you could set. And I realized that when it came to running the marathon, I remember doing my very first one, which was the St. Jude's Marathon. And the first 4 or 5 miles, man, you're on adrenaline. It feels great. And then you kind of settle in, you realize this is going to be long. And there's an ego thing because I'm running. I'm getting passed by people who are younger than me, people that are older than me, I'm just like, there's got to be someone behind me, but I'm being passed. But it's okay. I'm running my race, not their race. I'm running my race, and I'm just running it consistent. One nice thing about the marathon is you get the mile markers. So you pass mile marker 6, hey, only 20 miles left, And then mile 7, mile 10, only 16 miles left. And you get past it, you start going, hey, I'm at 13. And all of a sudden you think, I can do this. It hurts, but I can do it. I can run. And one of the great things I've had, every marathon I've run like one every other year, I always have my family that's been there to welcome me. And I look forward to seeing them. And it doesn't matter what my time is. It doesn't matter how many people came in before me or how many will be after me. They'll be there clapping. They'll be there smiling. They'll be there welcoming me. And it's just for that. Once you get that certain point, hey, I'm going to see them. This is going to feel great. I've accomplished it. It gives you the power to go through the hard stuff. And I think life's like that. That if we can understand this life is a marathon. I could have used the other verse from Hebrews where it says, run with endurance the race marked out before you. God is the one who's marked out the race, not us. You ever feel like our race is all uphill? Someone next to us, theirs seems downhill. It's like we run with endurance that race. We run what God's called us to know that our goal is to reach the end of the race, having been faithful day after day, to hear those words, well done, my good and faithful servant. I've shared some historical things, so I'll end with one last one. His name was William Carey. He's considered the father of modern missions. Carey was born in England in 1761, and he worked as a shoemaker, just a poor shoemaker. But he had a burden for reaching the nations for Christ. Here he was, not really a big platform, but he started looking around the world and seeing how many countries in the world didn't have a single missionary. They didn't have a single church. They didn't have any of the Bible in their language. He thought, how can we do this? He looked in England and he saw churches on every corner. He thought, we need to go. He read about the Great Commission that Christ told us to go. And so he started learning languages. He started studying the maps to know what places needed the most Christianity. And then he started speaking at churches, challenging them. And it was really disturbing people. They were like, why are you doing this? Why are you telling us we need to go in these foreign nations? One guy has said to him one time after speaking, he said, young man, sit down. When God is pleased to convert the heathen, he'll do it without your help or mine. And yet in 1793, he sailed to India with his family. And he arrived with the idea of saying God was going to use him there to reach people for Christ. And yet, he had heartbreak. His 5-year-old son died of dysentery when he was there. His wife suffered a mental breakdown that she never fully recovered. He was a missionary for 7 years. He went out. He learned the language. He spoke to people about Christ. His whole first year, not a single person received Christ. His second year there, not a single person received Christ. His third, his fourth, his fifth, his sixth. Finally, his 7th year there, the first person receives Christ. How effective would you see yourself as a full-time missionary who spends 7 years on the field and not a single person receives Christ? And yet he knew, you know what? God has called me to be here. I'm going to be faithful day after day after day. Over the next 4 decades, Carey was used greatly by God. He translated all or part of the Bible into 44 different languages, dialects. In other words, in some languages he's learned, he was able to literally translate the entire Bible, not a team, him. He was able in other dialects where he only knew smaller parts. He made certain parts, the New Testament, Psalms, different ones that he made available that weren't there before. He started training schools for indigenous pastors, something that was unheard of in that day. The idea was the Westerners came in as the missionaries, and they were the ones that had the knowledge. And if you wanted to become a Christian, they almost expected you to become a Westerner. The churches there looked like churches from the West. You would dress like a Westerner if you became a Christian. You would sing songs they sang in the West. And William Carey said, no, you don't have to be a Westerner to be a Christian. And so they learned to write songs that reflected their language, to wear their thing. Matter of fact, he even started wearing what the people in that area wore. And other missionaries like, what are you doing? And he started training these indigenous pastors who started planting churches and where they knew the culture, they knew the people, and it started exploding. He founded a college, Serampore College, that still operates today. If you were to look at the life of William Carey, you would see that, you know what? His life truly left a legacy. You remember the verse we started with from Psalms 90:12? Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. You know, if we want to live a life of legacy, we don't need to wait to the end and try to figure out. We need to plan it now. We need to look and say, God, where I am. You cannot change how you got here. You cannot go in the past, but you can make a radical difference on the rest of the days of your life. And for some of us, you know, the greatest legacy we can leave is just that with our family. I mean, they're the people we live with. They're the people we hang out with. They're the people who know us. And our ability to impact them is incredible. See, I grew up with a mom that I would find in the kitchen, their dining room. She'd have Bibles out, Bible studies, and she would be studying it. She taught Bible studies to ladies at our church. My dad didn't know Christ. As a matter of fact, my dad was very much not a believer. You only had to talk to him to understand his language didn't reflect that. He never went to church. He didn't think much of Christians. He was about as far from Christ as you can imagine. But I remember my mom praying for him every day. I remember my mom loving on him. I remember my dad in his mid-40s, he became a believer. And God radically changed him. His language changed. His lifestyle changed. He became a deacon. He became a Sunday school teacher. I saw, if I would ever wonder, is there real transforming power in the gospel? Absolutely, because I got that legacy in my family. I saw my dad radically change into a way I would have never believed possible when Jesus changed his life. And can I say, for some of you, the greatest legacy you're going to have is that of your children. It may be your cousins. It may be to your parents. It may be to your uncles, aunts. In other words, you can be used to make a difference because you're there. God has strategically placed you at a job where you may be the only believer that they know. God has put you in a neighborhood. God has put your kids in a sport team where all these places you can have an impact. And yet for some of us, you know what it means? It means just slowing down and thinking, what can I do today? It may be every day just praying for that person who doesn't know Christ. Every day looking for an opportunity to encourage him, looking for an opportunity to serve him. You may find your rule of 5 and be like John Maxwell was, faithfully chopping it every single day to say, God, I'm going to be faithful in what you've given me to do. There was a song that came out in 1974. It was written by Harry Chaplin. Actually, his wife wrote a poem. He turned it into a song. The song is Cats in the Cradle. It's one of those songs, most songs that long ago you wouldn't have heard of, but it's kind of stuck around, especially around Father's Day, because it tells the story of a dad who has a boy, and the boy wants to be with him, and the father never has time to be with him. He keeps saying, one day I'll do it, one day. And the boy's saying, one day I want to be just like you, Dad. I want to grow up and be just like you. And the song shares several times where the father gives the son a ball and the son says, hey, can we play catch? He said, I don't have time now, son, but we'll do it one day. You know we'll get to it one day. And then the song makes a turn. All of a sudden now the son's in college. And the dad's reaching out to the son to say, hey, let's hang out. Let's spend time together. And he says, Dad, I can't. I'm in college. I'm busy, but can I have the car keys? Later in the last verse, it talks about the son. He's now grown up. He's married. He's got a kid. He's got a job. And his dad calls him about hanging out. And he basically says, Dad, I can't. The new job's a challenge. The kids, it's just, I can't do it. But hey, Dad, we'll do it someday. I know we do it someday. The song ends, as I hang up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My son was just like me. See, legacy is not just something you leave behind while you're dead. Legacy is something you build while you're alive. And for some of you, I promise you, you can still leave a legacy. There are strategic places that God has placed you to make a difference. And you want to reach the end of your life, not with regret, but the end of your life saying, hey, you know what? God, I've served you, and I look forward to standing before you here. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Now listen, again, I say you cannot change the past, but you can change from this moment what's different. You can say, God, I want to live different. I want to live a life that matters. I don't want to live a life kind of just drifting. I want to live a life with purpose, one that will matter for you forever.